The following presentation provides an overview of the poster titled 632 Is It Time for a Biflex? As presented at the United Kingdom and Republic of Ireland ACBS Annual Conference held in London on November the 16th and November the 17th, 2024. The presentation does not introduce any new information beyond what is already contained in the poster. Hi, my name is Alida Di Gangi. I am a psychologist, psychotherapist, and I'm based in Italy. I'd like to share with you some reflections about clinical improvement and psychological flexibility. Let's consider the theme of this year's conference. Expanding horizons, nurturing connections and growth in contextual behavioral science. Well, connections have a lot to do with love, so let me start with a simple question. What is love? Framed this way, the question encourages deeper reflection on what love feels like, represents, or how it manifests in a human experience. Such a discussion may last for hours. For the sake of conciseness, we might better rephrase it as what does love mean and try to find a definition or explanation of the word love. There is a wide array of definitions. According to Henel and colleagues, a systematic distinction that has greatly influenced philosophical history is that between eros, philia, and agape. Eros describes a growing desire for something that is lacking. It closely resembles the deep feelings you have for someone who completes you. Philia, on the other hand, denotes the affection shared between friends. God's merciful love for humankind is called agape. Thinking about them in terms of direction, eros resembles an upward movement. Philia is represented by a horizontal relationship between equals. Agape consists more in a downward vertical movement from God to his children. This distinction may seem simplistic. Nevertheless, these terms have gained considerable importance, especially in the modern age. What would happen if we lived in a perfect world? In a perfect world, if I mean love, I will say love, and then you will hear love and understand love. Similarly, if you mean love, you will say love, and then I will hear love and understand love. In both cases, there would be a bidirectional and perfectly symmetrical relationship between what the people in the conversation say, mean, and understand. Oh dear. Yes, in our less than perfect world, I might mean agape and say love, but you might hear love and understand eros. Similarly, you might mean philia and say love, and I might hear love and understand eros. And more problems arise. Hugging your very special one may seem a perfectly appropriate way to mean eros. However, someone else might argue that other, let's say, behavioral repertoires are far more articulate and effective. In our less than perfect world, we may end up using the very same word to refer to very different concepts, while different terms may convey the same idea. Fortunately, this only happens, in everyday life and not in psychology. Doesn't it? In fact, that's not the case. Edward Thorndike in 1904 and Truman Lee Kelly in 1927 described the problems that arise in psychology when the link between constructs and scales used to measure them is blurred. Fallacies can occur in the following circumstances. When scales labeled with the same name actually describe different constructs, this is called the jingle fallacy. And when differently labeled scales refer to the same construct, and this is called the jangle fallacy. Over the years, many jingle-jangle fallacies have been detected in studies on impulsivity, empathy, emotion assessment, theory of mind, mindfulness, and language learning, to name a few. This, in turn, had led to the development of statistical procedures and recommendations to avoid them. Why is it important to investigate the presence of the jingle-jangle fallacy in psychology? These fallacies may reduce the reliability of scales, leading to type 1 and type 2 errors. As you all know, type 1 errors or false positives occur when we observe effects that aren't actually present. Type 2 errors or false negatives describe the failure to observe effects that are in fact real. Moreover, unreliable measures tend to contain a high level of measurement error, making it harder to interpret the size of observed effects. This could hinder empirical discoveries by affecting the comparability of measures and constructs. Psychological phenomena with similar labels may hinder communication among researchers. Similarly, using different labels to study the same phenomenon can prevent knowledge convergence. Giving a new name to a measure that already exists may lead to separate research programs. Failing to recognize that different research strands are investigating the same construct can slow progress in clinical psychological science. The development of overlapping constructs may result in redundant measures, bifurcated literatures, and constructs without unique psychological importance. Messick described the resulting situation as one where test meaning resides in each investigator's measurement operations rather than in validated relational or nomological networks. But wait a minute, clinical improvement is often measured by scales. Could the same problem, confusion over what clinical improvement really means and how we should measure it, be lurking here? Does it consequently hinder communication between different agencies as well as between theories? A broad and possibly unscientific description of clinical improvement might be the fact that after an intervention, patients score better on certain scales and in some contexts feel better and act better. Typically, we evaluate patients before an intervention, after it, and at certain intervals afterward. While this procedure is useful, it doesn't fully consider that patients don't live in a vacuum. They are often immersed in contexts that include other people, institutions, communities, and cultures, all of which can influence patients and have an interest in quantifying their clinical improvement. These external agents may also have opinions on what the intervention should focus, what should change, and to what extent. Patients themselves may hold implicit culturally transmitted ideas about these topics. And finally, communication between all parties may be essential. For example, consider someone who feels they are lacking something and resolves to become a better parent. This person may be intrinsically motivated or may be responding to a goal set by someone else, such as a spouse, child, community, or institution. For example, child services or family court. In the latter case, the person may not agree with the third party and may simply refuse to see the problem or take action. Let's assume, though, that this person is determined to do something and wants to understand what is lacking. The problem can be attributed to a combination of inadequacies in many different domains. The issue may stem from a variety of deficiencies: financial, housing, health. There may also be other culturally and possibly historically determined peculiar domains, as well as psychological concerns. Thus, Someone seeking psychological help to become a better parent has likely already gone through at least 2 informal or implicit evaluations. Now, consider this person walking into a consultation room to start psychotherapy with the goal of becoming a better parent. This will involve undergoing formal evaluation, starting with psychological testing, followed by case conceptualization, intervention, and outcome assessment. As all you probably know, there is a vast array of psychological theories and therapies, so seamless overlap between them cannot be taken for granted. Who then is entitled to declare this person improved, and to what extent? The clinician who provided the intervention may argue that the patient's improvement is reflected in better scores on parenting scales, which probably indicate that the patient also feels and acts better. However, clinicians rarely observe patients in their everyday lives, so the link between scoring better, feeling better, and acting better is often correlational or inferred. The same can happen if another clinician, for example a supervisor, is involved. If institutions like social services or family court are involved, improvement may be judged based on observable behavior, with less emphasis on scores and feelings. A better parent may be someone who pays bills, holds a job, and avoids addictions. Similarly, the community may evaluate improvement in more informal ways, prioritizing how the person acts over how they score or feel. A better parent may be someone who behaves more pleasantly, is more committed, and shows care. Finally, patients themselves will evaluate their own progress. To them, the way they act and feel may be the most salient indicators. For example, they may believe they become better parents because they spend more time helping their children with homework and feel more confident in their role. In summary, people who approach psychotherapy are seldom novices. They may already have implicit expectations about what psychotherapy involves and how it works. The same applies to other agents in the patient's life, each with their own definitions and expectations. Every theory also has a precise definition of clinical improvement, but this consistency doesn't always hold when different theories or institutions try to communicate. In other words, scales or measurements criteria that use the same term, for example, clinical improvement, may refer to different constructs or observable phenomena. This can result in a jingle fallacy. Turning to observable behavior may provide a solution. Psychological flexibility, or PF, describes the ability to contact the present moment more fully as a conscious human being and to change or persist in behavior when doing so serves valued ends. PF is something that a person does and not what a person feels or how a person scores. There are 2 ways in which measuring to what extent a person does PF may provide us help. Enhancing our ability to compare different interventions, for example, based on different theoretical propositions, and allowing better communication between different agents or agencies. PF can serve as a lowest common denominator describing what a patient does before and after an intervention. To do that, PF processes should be further condensed. How can we achieve this? A common ground might be what Pearson and Trout call volitional attention. According to these 2 authors, there are 2 fundamental types of animal movement: automatic and volitional. Consciousness has evolved as a platform for volitional attention, which in turn makes possible what Pearson and Trout call its sole causal payoff, volitional movement. The latter consists of an enhanced ability to direct attention and therefore movement to whatever is important for an organism's survival and reproduction. A conscious organism benefits from volitional attention through the ability to non-deterministically yet non-randomly sustain attention on a particular conscious content and the ability to sustain attention longer than default neural processes would allow. In other words, an organism can volitionally sustain attention longer on content already in the focus of awareness, or shift attention, namely volitionally sustain attention on fringe content, thereby making that content focal. The distinction between focus and fringe of consciousness is particularly important to volitional attention. Focus and fringe of consciousness make switching among objects of attention possible. An organism can only directly choose the contents of its consciousness from inside its consciousness. In other words, you cannot say to yourself, I will now think about this, unless you are already at least peripherally conscious of the this. Nevertheless, once a content is inside your conscience, you can select it by moving it from the fringe to the focus of awareness. You can also bring in more information about it by choosing to sustain a thought process about it. Contents placed within the fringe can consciously be moved from the fringe to the focus. If consciousness had no fringe, if it had tunnel vision, limited to one object, volitional choice would be reduced to stop or go, and organisms could not consciously select among the alternatives available at a particular moment. Is PF similar to volitional attention? In other words, does psychotherapy help patients learn to meaningfully answer these two questions? Where am I focusing my attention now? And where do I want to focus my attention now? Drawing on the construct of volitional attention, let us condense the hexaflex and triflex processes in two groups of mutually related skills. Attention, the ability to focus, and volition, the ability to decide whether to sustain focus or shift it elsewhere. And for the sake of conciseness, let us label it Biflex. From this perspective, fusion with content may imply rigidly focusing on a particular content or private event. Acknowledging that there are many different contents to focus on and some of them are problematic could be labeled as acceptance. It is impossible to change the contents themselves. However, I can shift my attention from the focus to the fringe, that is, to other contents. Those other contents may in turn represent what really matters, contact with values, or a quick fix, values and clarity. From that position, I can focus or persist in a particular behavior or shift or change to a different one, committed or unworkable action. A continually occurring process of focusing attention while deciding to sustain it or shift it will arise and become more salient over time. My verbal community will train me in acknowledging this process of attention sustaining or shifting and in labeling it as a feeling. It will train me in acknowledging that this process always starts from the same steady point, which is labeled as I, and located inside, preferably in the brain. This I itself can become a content on which I can focus more or less rigidly, that is, in workable or unworkable ways. From this perspective, the self ceases to be an entity, It may instead represent the reification of attentional and volitional processes, that is, the act of focusing attention and deciding whether to sustain or shift it. This is the end of this presentation. More than real conclusions, I would like to share with you the following questions. Does the jingle fallacy affect the construct of clinical improvement? To what extent? To what extent does it hinder communication not only between different theories but also between different agencies and institutions? To what extent can it be stated that, using different technologies, different psychotherapists train patients in psychological flexibility? Can we condense our psychological flexibility processes in two groups of mutually related skills labeled attention and volition? Do different psychotherapies, to varying extents, train patients' ability to focus their attention and dynamically decide whether that focus should stay sustained or shift elsewhere? More broadly, do different psychotherapies, to varying extents, train patients to recognize, label, and consciously engage with cognitive processes? When it comes to quantifying clinical improvement, can taking such abilities explicitly into account help us promote better communication not only between theories but also between agencies and institutions? These are some references for further reading. And finally, thank you for watching, dear friends.